Welcome Andy Doyle, Chief Product and AI Leader, to the second episode of the Tech Paired podcast. How are you getting on, Andy?
I'm good, thanks. And you?
Yeah, good. Yeah, really surreal and good to be meeting you face to face.
Thank you.
No, smashing. So you're joining us today to explore turning chaos into clarity and how you've built and scaled SaaS, IoT, and looked at AI strategy within some of your past companies.
Yeah, indeed.
Andy, you've had a fascinating journey through consulting, big tech and startup growth. So for listeners who might not know your background, what's been the common thread through all of that?
I think it's probably been sat between technologists or engineers or specialists and business people, and being able to, because I'm curious about technology, I'm curious about technical concepts, and being able to translate that from one side to the other. Just that, and that's almost accidental. I didn't wake up one day, I didn't graduate from my English degree. When people look at my English degree and go, how come you're in tech? How does that work? And I think it's something about taking sometimes ambiguous information, being able to translate it into something that it's definable, understandable, and that's helped me well in all of the roles that I've fulfilled to date.
And how's that shaped how you lead today?
That means because I always have this kind of inbuilt sort of perception of my own technical weakness that therefore I have to put trust in other people. And so all the sort of teams I've ever built and then led, I think the majority would always say that Andy lets me do the thing that I'm specialist in and helps shape and organize and create direction towards the strategy where you're going. But I don't try and do other people's jobs for them when they're the people most expert able to do.
Mm-hmm. That delegation piece must be hard as well, though. I find it I used to find it hard. It's like delegating to people and not actually doing the role for them kind of thing. How have you found that throughout your kind of career?
Another thing will be I find that quite easy. So I think sometimes, and again, it's just one of those kind of self-conversations that you have around, am I doing enough? Am I outsourcing some of the thinking to other people because I believe in their technical depth? But I think I'm always available, always there to help guide and shape the direction of things without feeling I have to do the work. There's certain things I enjoy getting stuck into. Obviously in AI there's been a lot of discovery, and so I really enjoy that journey of teaching myself how to do some of these things. Yep. I've built products using some of these new vibe coding tools. I know it's sort of, some people love it, some people hate it, but I don't think it makes me a software engineer. It's just intriguing that I get to I can get to build something, but I would never go to a client and say, look, I built your product. I'd always go to the specialist and the experts to deliver.
Yeah. Delegation can go wrong sometimes because as a leader, you think it's right to delegate this, that and the other. But how do you know you're selecting the right person? How do you know you've armed them with the right tools and you're providing the right support for them?
Yeah, a good question. I have been burnt in the past where I believed in an individual's ability to lead others, and maybe I've let go a bit too soon. So it's not that you don't make mistakes, but you also have to be able to recover from those mistakes. So it's not a science, it's an art. I feel like I generally read people pretty well, and so by and large, I make more successes than errors.
Cool.
Thanks for that.
Given a bit of an overview then, like we mentioned, so I think where did we first meet? We first met when you were still at ARM, or you were leaving ARM?
I think I was leaving ARM, yeah.
Yeah, so like previous to that, was it like Mott MacDonald, ARM, and then into...
It was PA Consulting.
PA Consulting.
And then I did my own consultancy business for a little while, helping startups and founders of different businesses. Worked with X-Design in Edinburgh, who are a software agency. So there's been, I guess the last 10 years has been characterised by a bit of chop and change, but that was the risk you take when you start to work with startups and scale-ups. That's part of the journey.
Yeah, totally, I can imagine, yeah.
So when you've built and scaled teams, how do you ensure that what makes a truly high-performing product or data team in your view?
Again, trust is a huge part of it, and a level of autonomy, but also clarity without control. So I guess a lot of buzzwords, but you want to have a fairly clear direction of the strategy and path you're taking. You want to hire people who are specialists in what they do, but they also have to have an adaptable and agile sort of frame of mind. So you're going to do things that don't work. You're going to try things. You're going to need to learn new things. And so that never goes particularly always smoothly. And sometimes the direction you set isn't the right one. You have to pivot. And that's not an excuse for not having a strategy. That just means when you're deviating from the direction, you're doing it for a good reason. And if you feel confident that actually, I thought it was this, my assumption was taking me in this direction, but we've learned something new, so now we need to change course a little bit. And so you need people who are willing to not get stuck in a fixed mindset to say, you said we were doing that, that's the only thing I'm going to do. You told me to go in that direction, I can't deviate course. You have to have a bit of flexibility and adaptability in a sort of startup, scale-up type of environment. Different if you're in a large corporate body, of course. But again, I've got a lot of experience in developing new ventures within corporate environments. So again, that gives you both the safety of a big corporate revenue engine that's kind of means you're not going to go out of business, with the ability to just try and launch something new. So I did that back from probably late 2000s, since I've been involved in new venturing of one type or another.
So obviously Phair, who run the Phair podcast, are involved in recruitment. So it's obviously of interest to myself and Michael. When you are recruiting people into your organisation, how much thought goes into it? An awful lot of people saying, oh, better get one of these. Jack's snowed under with work, better get another one of these. But it's very much about what they need, and it's not thinking forward what the person needs and so on. How much thought process do you put into recruitment?
Quite a lot. So organisational design, again, is another sort of area that I've spent a bit of time, both from a consulting perspective and then putting it into practice in various organisations. So you do need to think about it. But again, you also have to be, one thing I've learned certainly in the last sort of 10, 15 years or so is that you think you have a sort of job specification in mind, and then you meet someone and you think they don't quite fit that specification, but I can see where they overlap or where they might reach into other areas. So again, you can't be too fixed. I'm sure maybe in a large organisation and you need someone, a square peg to fit in a square hole. Makes sense, you're going to be quite rigid. But again, in the sort of growth journey, quite often you're saying, is the person dynamic? Do they have most of what I need? Could they lead into other areas that would be helpful? You have to have that sort of ability to flex. And again, when you're dealing with recruiters, you need to tell them that's what you need. You're not just looking for the thing that's defined in a set of words. The worst job descriptions you ever read are the ones that are just wish lists that go on for pages and say, we want all this. No one can ever reply to those effectively. They're always going to be making stuff up in order to meet the requirement. But if what you're looking for is a person type, then I think that's much more rewarding and interesting person to go find.
I think for recruiters, it's key. What you said there is to get the information out of your head into the recruiter's head. I had somebody tell me once that I'll know the person when I see them, Stuart. And I said to them, okay, I'll move in with you. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, I'll follow you around, and when you see the person, point to them and I'll go and interview them. He said, I need to get out of my head into your head, what I'm looking for. I said, absolutely, we're never going to find the person.
He didn't want you to live with him.
No, he didn't.
Just told that disconnect sometimes. How would, talking about kind of product companies and companies that are like set up to then go and develop something from MVP into finally put it out to market, like how do you plan out a structure for like how many people you'll need? Like, how does that even happen to that kind of scale of organizational design?
Yeah, again, there is, I won't say it's an art completely, but again, it's a mixture of art and science. When I was thinking about the function at Utopi, for example, in my head, I could see how a certain number of work streams could emanate from the product as I understood it at that time. I also had to take into consideration the budget that would be made available as a result of our Series A funding. Yep. And so think about what resources we currently had in the team. So if you take some of those inputs, then actually quite quickly a structure begins to emerge about what it is you need. And again, you don't have it 100% nailed on from day one, but you begin with that process, and as you start to meet people, you realize, okay, that plan needs to morph. But basically in my head, just to cut to the chase, at Utopia I thought there were 3 work streams. We needed integrated product and engineering. We needed some cyber security architecture capability. We needed some data capability. It was relatively as simple as that. I was also asked to recruit the customer success team. So again, I understood roughly the proportion of what that team size should look like. And then you begin to execute. And we had to change course a couple of times. We had to adjust the size of the teams. And then in the life cycle of those teams forming and performing, we took them apart, reassembled them multiple times in order to meet the dynamic needs of the business. So it's not static, but you do need to start out with a plan. I don't want any of this to sound like you don't need to plan, because it's only when your plan starts to feel a bit awry that you think if you don't have a plan, then you don't know what to benchmark it against or sense check it against.
So I take it if kind of something is not going right, or you can kind of see not that it's a conveyor belt developing a product, but see if it was and it's slowing down or there's issues happening, it's like identifying the fault and thinking these are the options I have to fix. And it can be sometimes resource there's not enough or in the wrong kind of positions, and you can kind of maneuver them about kind of thing.
Exactly. But the interesting phrase you used there is the assembly line, which is what product attempts to achieve. But unfortunately, some people think it is an assembly line, and it isn't. But there's a lot of product methodology and stuff out there that sort of says, yes, you can turn it into a machine. And I never think it is. There's a podcast, a guy called John Cutler. I've never met him, but I read his stuff on LinkedIn. And he has this sort of theme called The Beautiful Mess. And that to me is really what product is about. You're trying to assemble all of these conflicting and great ideas from different stakeholders, both customers, founders, and other people within the business. And you're trying somehow to form it into something that fits with what the market wants. That's not a simple process of just add all these ingredients together and out pops a product. It's actually an ongoing, dynamic, ever-shifting thing, and that's part of the joy of doing it.
Excuse me.
It must be, I don't want to jump up, I'll stay on leadership and product thinking, but it must be difficult in leadership is to look at like the backlog or features. So the customer's asking for one thing. People internally are saying like, really good if we did this thing. You've got all these, and there's some senior sponsor who's saying, I really want to get this thing. You've got to manage all these expectations. You've got negotiation must be a massive part of it.
Yeah, see this grey hair?
Wish you've got some.
That must be so challenging to like manage all these expectations and also deliver. And
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's no getting away from it. That is central to what, certainly at the chief product officer level, you're trying to navigate. One thing it's rare to have full control over what the vision and the strategy and what that product backlog ought to contain and what needs to get prioritized. You are effectively trying to be a diplomat between competing interests and saying, and the other thing that I feel that hopefully I've been effective at is trying to surface an understanding within the organization outside of the product and engineering function how complex these things are actually to deliver. So it might look on the face of it that a feature is just a bit of code. Surely that doesn't take that long, does it?
Yeah.
When actually it's not just about the time it might take to deliver the feature. We then need to support the feature. That then might be some technical debt that we can't do. So just trying to heighten everyone's awareness of the complexity that sits below the surface and all of these kind of competing. The displacement that takes place, if you do one thing, then that means you take a team away from doing another thing. Quite often those trade-offs just don't exist in people's heads. So you have to present them with it and try not to look like you're just being awkward, but say, look, we as a business have to make these trade-offs. And so that's something I find a lot of CXO sort of level people just don't really fully appreciate what goes on underneath the hood.
So what's the biggest learning you've taken from mistake in that environment?
I think sometimes you can lean into process a bit too quickly. So I think that's certainly one thing. I created a sort of a software tool to allow people to volunteer feature ideas. And actually what we also had to do was mop up a whole bunch of legacy feature ideas and put it into a central repository so we could see what was in the backlog and start to refine and do that. And I think by doing so, I created the perception that we had a fully functioning, coherent process for managing all of that backlog. So people were saying, so where's my idea? I said, we haven't got to it yet. We're still working through it. And actually that created frustration because people were saying, we're using the tool that you said we should use. Where's the resource and process in order to back it up? And so I think that was a failure on my part not to properly resource what was required to manage all of that backlog or properly set expectations about how long it might take for some of these things to be refined in that process.
Thanks for that.
No. So in today's environment then, what skills or mindsets do you think are essential for emerging product or AI leaders?
So that's agility and a willingness to be able to change and experiment, so particularly in AI. So I don't know if this leads on to another part of the podcast, but we did a lot of work with AI over the last 9 to 12 months, and the ground beneath your feet was shifting on a daily basis. So the tools were changing, the commercial models were changing, the LLMs were publishing new versions of their models that could focus on this and it could do that, and so on and so forth. And so it's quite difficult to anchor yourself in... try to anchor yourself in a sort of fixed ground to say, okay, we'll move forward on this basis because things are changing. But you still learn a lot from the experimentation process. You still begin to understand, how do I orchestrate a workflow using different agents and sort of the tools that sit behind it to allow you to connect all of these moving parts together to create an agentic workflow, for example. Even though it was quite hard to say, okay, we've got it, we built one and here it is. We learned a lot so much in that process that means that it's not lost. It means that when you go to the next iteration of the tools that are available, you're already up the curve in terms of, I know how this works, I've got this. Mm-hmm. But that also told me that a lot of the hype in AI, particularly probably going back to 6 to 9 months now, was quite overblown in terms of replacing you as replacing people's jobs and so on and so on. It's really difficult to build these agents and so on and do it well. The last thing you want to do is release into the market something that just pisses customers off. And that was anathema to me. I thought there's no way I'm going to just agree that we need to do something in AI and just launch it to the market and then for everyone to go, this is horrible. You're ruining the product. Yeah. Why would you do that? So I think there will be pressure to start to get some of these things out into the marketplace as soon as possible. I get it. But I think the worst thing you can do is just release something that doesn't work. So
this is into like part 2, which is AI and data strategy. But it's almost, remember when like HD came out and it's like true HD and then it was like, I don't know, like 4K and thing. It's all like, marketing, and it's like AI built in and all this kind of stuff, and it's like company, everyone just needs to put something like washing machine AI, like just everything's got it on it, and like you're saying, it's just, oh, we need to have it because it's the new thing in the market. But how do you're doing product, you're working in a company, you're looking at AI, and it's moving so quickly, it's like a moving target. Because just now you can see, oh, look over there, that's the destination we want to get to, what we could achieve. Let's build a roadmap to it. But then in 3 months' time, it can do something else now. It can do something else now. Like, how do you anchor to something that's kind of constantly moving about?
It's difficult. And I think what AI doesn't change is this kind of the need for proper product release processes and thinking. So the fact that it's AI doesn't mean you can suddenly, it can just chuck things into the market. It still needs to go through what problem am I trying to solve? What's the ROI? What data do I need in order to make it function? What resources do I need in order to build it? All of these things exist for any technology product, and AI is absolutely no different. It's just, I think, because it's democratized, it's in everyone's web browser now, effectively, that people think it's easy, and it isn't.
So what would you say most companies are getting wrong now in the implementation of AI?
Releasing too early when things don't work properly. And we've all had experience, this maybe predates the kind of recurrent AI, but all those sort of chatbots that basically can't answer a basic question or can't answer even a slightly complex question. And people go, what's the point of this? Contact the contact center in order to be told something that I can read on a website, for example, or what a pointless waste of everyone's time that is. So there's stuff like releasing too early on poorly built sort of things. There's the must do something in AI, so therefore I'm going to badge my product as AI. I think that's a big mistake. What about we've applied human intelligence to this? Wouldn't that be quite a gratifying thing on a product? So that's, I think, the worst thing that companies can be doing now is saying it's too difficult. I don't know where to start. You should just start and do it in a safe way. So keep it away from products and customers. But experimenting and going through that learning process, I think, is absolutely critical, even if you don't release something for another 24 months, as long as it's not critical to how your business functions or you're not going to be undermined by a pure AI competitor in that space. But experimentation and learning now is absolutely critical, because I think if you try and do it in 24 months' time, you'll be behind the curve. There'll be vendors out there who are already doing it better than you. There'll be vendors who are delivering products to you at a cost that's probably going to start becoming prohibitive. So people will take the sort of ChatGPT, the general LLMs, and will start developing very use case specific or functional or sectoral specific versions of that LLM for your business, for example. And then you're going to start to see lock-in and all of the usual kind of technology cycles we've seen before.
I mean, that was one of the things I was going to ask about. Companies have obviously got FOMO, so like pouring so much into AI and like trying to get things done quickly. And it's AI, quick ROI, like how do we get it kind of thing. But you're saying it's, look at the kind of long term and really plan out, play about with it, but don't just jump in.
Yeah. And it's not, again, similar to any sort of digital product. It's not a set it and forget it. You can't just launch it and then it'll take care of itself. Models drift, agents become, unless they're constantly fed new information, will just become old. And so it's not a zero sum, just, I've got an AI widget now. Away you go, we can move on to something else. It needs maintenance. And that, again, that comes back to sort of product thinking and understanding. The more features you release, the more things you put out into the marketplace. That's a maintenance overhead then that you have to take care of. You also have to retire things out of the product suite as well, because there's only so much resource you can use to manage.
How do you balance innovation in AI with ethical and responsible use, especially as the tech evolves faster than regulation?
Yeah, that's another huge challenge. I think my last company, what I did was introduce a governance framework, recognizing actually that people's AI use was already endemic within the organization. And so I did a few things. Set up a governance framework to say, look, we can't put customer data or company data through these public LLMs because that's too risky. But we do have paid for products through Microsoft and so on, which means that actually it's a safer space to do, particularly company information, less so customer information. Create a sandbox environment so that it's secure, it's on premises, it's away from the cloud, where we could start to experiment with when I say customer data, some of the sensor data that we were collecting on customer premises. So we could start to experiment in a safe environment, secure environment that meant we could start to do some machine learning, look at how algorithms might work using some models that were not connected to the cloud but on premises. I also created a kind of confessional form for allow people to say, look, I did this. I released some customer data. And so we could get a sense of whether we had a problem or whether or not people's use was generally and then so I put the framework in place. I tried to make sure it wasn't top down and too centralized, because you actually want to encourage bottom up experimentation. You really want individuals who are interested to go and think about something and say, I'll go and just try that thing, because that's where good use cases and transferable use cases would emerge. So at the moment, I think, is a sort of an emergent field of tech. You're trying to encourage people to be transparent about what they're doing, but still maintain a level of experimentation that doesn't close everything down too quickly, was certainly my approach to it. Whether that's the right one, time will tell. But
Thanks for that.
That's completely answered my second question. Well, the next question. There's only like a company listening to this just now, or a CEO or a founder or whoever, looking at AI and they've maybe been a bit shy to go for it for their first use cases. Like, what do you think the first thing they should try would be? Just the sandbox thing, experiment?
Well, I guess the very first step I did was to create a survey within the staff organisation to say, what are people's hopes and fears about AI? What's their understanding of AI? How do they define it? So we build up a kind of, here's what my team currently think about AI. Do they feel knowledgeable? Do they have gaps? Are they scared by it? Are they excited by it? At least build up that kind of sense of what is the organisation? What do the team want to do? And how do they want to be engaged by it? So that's step one. Then look at particular pinch points within the business, as you would with any sort of consultancy or product development. You say, what are the problems that we've got in the business, and is there an AI solution potentially to fix it? And if there is, then that's where you start to experiment a little bit and say, how do we do this safely? If there's like a proposal writing, for example, if that's taken up loads of time, is there a way that we can boilerplate some of this stuff? Is there a way we can create an agent that will help answer certain key questions, or look at certain file structures within the business that can we retrieve some of that information more readily? There are some fairly obvious places that most businesses probably struggle with. It could be early candidates, but don't use AI for its own sake. Just try and fix a problem, because that's where you'll get.
So don't go buy 200 Copilot licenses and just hand them out and say, on you go.
That's not a great strategy. It's a strategy, but not a great
Don't do it, yeah. Don't do it. Check your data first, yeah.
One thing another partly AI will expose is people's companies' data models are quite often incomplete, incoherent, not linked. So one thing we found in our last company, not that it was incoherent, it was just that the way the company had evolved. So we had silos of information sat in different systems. And actually, if you want to then put a layer of AI across the top of it, you begin to realize that you're not defining things in the same way across systems. And so you need a sort of structured data model to say, if we're going to define an asset in this way here, it needs to be defined in the same way over here. You could create an AI that will try and recognize and leverage or navigate those differences, but that's a whole world of pain. You may as well try and fix the data model and fix it early, particularly in a scale-up. Recognize as things start to grow that maybe your systems are getting a little bit out of kilter. Mm-hmm. If you see your future in AI, then you need to fix that pretty early on in the journey to make sure that data is good.
Is that kind of, I suppose, departments like marketing, HR, finance are going to have different ways of doing things, different ways of working, storage. Sheila's got all these Excel spreadsheets sitting in a folder somewhere.
That is exactly it. But we had CRM that had one view of what an asset and a customer and how those things got defined. We had a finance system that had a slightly different way, not wildly different, but sufficiently different to make it a little bit complex when you're trying to reconcile. Then we had our actual product databases and so on and so forth, which again had a slightly nuanced view of how to describe some of these entities, these data entities within the model. And so you need to get that fixed. Otherwise, it's hard from a data science perspective to then analyze things consistently across the business. And it's even harder then to make AI effectively and efficiently operate across those domains.
I mean, is there any underrated like data strategy principles that companies should look at? We've mentioned obviously all different things, making data like the right way and coherent, and it's all set up that AI can understand the different categories. There's nothing like confusing towards it. Was there anything else that would be useful that companies should look at? Or
I think if you're a high volume data business, say Utopi was, one thing that we also learned was that not all data is created equal. So some of it you collect a lot of metadata, a lot of environmental data that's about the data itself. And if you put all that into the database and someone goes to retrieve one component of that whole data set, then the CPUs and everything are trying to crunch through this vast data set, trying to find one nugget of information. It slows everything down for everybody, from people sat behind the systems trying to write code, from the customer success people trying to do a query for a customer, from customers themselves trying to access the data. It grinds everything down, and you have these huge kind of needs to scale everything at high volume. Whereas if you actually realize that some of that data set that you're collecting, someone might only need to see it once a month. So you can put it in another place, put it in a place where it's less accessible, easier to store, cheaper to store, less effort on the CPUs and so on and so forth. So that's a realization we came to, and then it took us a little while to fix when the performance of the platform was just degrading to such an extent it was becoming almost unusable. So we had to just completely restructure the data, realize that probably 60% of it is stuff that we needed to keep. It didn't need to be accessible by customers without just endlessly scaling and costing more and more to make the product bigger.
An analogy of that then, like something like keeping it on the RAM rather than putting it in a hard drive kind of thing. So it's not constantly needing to be looked at. And I suppose the CPU is just going, oh my, there's so much information to churn through kind of thing.
You see a little ball of death when you're trying to run a really simple query. And again, that really kills customer experience at the platform.
That's really cool. I would never really think about that.
What do you think the biggest barriers are in preventing true digital transformation in more traditional industries?
Barriers, probably people and lack of clarity and top-down fiats that don't have bottom-up buy-in. So it's sort of fairly traditional, probably well-understood concepts. That doesn't mean they're easy to solve. But quite often, I mean, we actually had it with our last company, not in the company itself, but a lot of companies we dealt with who were a little bit reluctant to adopt our platform. They're saying, look, we keep getting told we need to use these platforms, but they get done to us. We get told that we just bought Utopi. We'd like you to start using it now, please. And they go, we don't know what it's for. We don't know what value it's supposed to bring. How does it meet? How does it fit into the KPIs that we're being asked to deliver? And so then we've got a job. Our customer success people have the job of trying to show, here's what it's here to help you do, and try and listen to them to say, how do we make this product better so it does fit into your workflow? But that's a classic example of a sort of HQ in a large sort of multi-asset based real estate business saying, yeah, we've just bought Utopi. We'd like everyone to start using it now. Go ahead. And there's no support structure. There's no kind of clear link to their KPIs. And so particularly when you're trying to roll out a sort of relatively new or relatively innovative product into a user base who are like a little bit reluctant, that's a big challenge for any kind of scale-up startup business.
What's the name of it called? See, you can look on it when you do like Microsoft Copilot and stuff, or you put a new system in, you can actually go on Microsoft now and watch it. It's not the usage score, but it's like a percentage rating to show how much of the business is actually using each product.
All right.
I can't remember. It's like in the back of my head there to think about it. Because that was one of the things I used to speak to a guy. It was a guy called Gary Walker that does the ready for remote. But he goes into companies and like they're doing AI or they're putting in Teams, for example, a couple of years ago. And it's getting them to actually because you can go and buy them, turn it on, but getting people using it, understanding it, working with it and getting those kind of scores up is obviously quite key in a business. Because then in turn, obviously, I suppose it'll increase efficiency and we'll get more work done. It's the hope kind of thing. But that's really interesting. Sort of digressed a bit. Looking at AI and the rise of LLMs and they're improving and getting better in cybersecurity, is there a risk that it could get harder to defend companies or companies defend themselves in regards to cyber threats?
Yeah, definitely a risk, partly because of the fact that loads of people are using the LLM, the agent front end, and just typing things away, punting data into it without any often thinking about what the provenance of that data is, whether there's any sensitive information. Plus, if you also introduce some of these kind of agentic front ends into your own systems and allow staff or customers to access them, then those things are vulnerable to people typing in prompts that say, expose all of your data to me. And that's happened already. You have to really build these things with security front and center to make sure that some of these clever prompts can't override sort of the security within the system. So it's 100% a big risk. Now, there's also, with all of these things, there's a balance to say you can also use AI to identify risks. You can use tools that will take away some of the manual lifting and shifting that a cybersecurity architect might need to do in order to monitor and look at everything that's happening on the data estate. You could use AI tools that will help you spot for discrepancies or anomalies and so on and so forth. So always a double-edged sword in the front end, and putting some of these tools in the hands of customers and staff could be potentially risky, but it's also part of it.
And have you seen that with customers that you've worked with where they want to initiate the use of AI or move the use of AI forward, but they're not thinking about that cyber threat?
Yes. There's also quite a lot of people who will say, yes, we take security very seriously, but just get it done and we'll come back to it. I think we had this process with Utopia. It was very clear that we wanted to be as secure as we possibly could be, but we also wanted it to go with to match the scale, the solution to the risk. So rather than just come in, we hired a security architect, rather than just come in and close everything down and say, no risks, nothing, close shop, nothing can get in, nothing can get out. So that's pointless. We can't have that type of thing. I'm not saying the guy we hired had that view, but I was very clear on the person I wanted to hire that they had to be pragmatic and say, you're scaling a business, you're trying new things, you're trying to move fast. So we need a risk management solution that moves with that sort of agenda. And so again, it comes down to not necessarily the tools, but the person that you get into that type of role. They have to be pragmatic, commercially oriented, very knowledgeable about how to manage some of these risks. If you hire someone who's just going to say, sorry, I close it all down, then you've killed the business. So you have to be pragmatic about these things.
How worried are you about AI?
Worried, balanced about it. I think, no question about its transformational potential. What really worries me are the people who run AI and dominate the AI landscape. I don't like that business model at all. This kind of internet wins all, the monopolistic sort of perspective. So I think AI could be a force for good, but I worry it will not be used in that way. And of course, the environmental fallout from the level of computation is enormous. That's the thing we don't really think about. Again, you want AI to somehow be part of the solution. Models will become more efficient. People will learn how that you don't need to crunch the entire internet in order to answer a simple query. So the models will become more efficient. But there's no question between Google and ChatGPT, and I don't mean Google AI. Google is a search engine. It's night and day in terms of the volume of energy consumed in order to respond to queries, and that's a big problem and a constant source of debate in my household. I want to encourage the use of AI responsibly in the places where it will make a difference. I get quite a lot of pushback to say, but it's just burning the forests. Why would you use them?
It was one of the things Federico said about people or AI replacing, we want it to do these things, but it's now doing these things. It's kind of what do we want it to do, and what kind of future are we building? Because it's getting it to do all these things, but what are we doing in 30 years, 30 years?
This rhetoric that says AI is transformational, it can replace human doing certain menial jobs, so we can all become sort of intellectual powerhouses doing things that are more interesting. And we know that's bullshit, because what's Sam Altman been pushing lately is erotic assistance or something like some sort of porn bot, basically, and shopping. And we could do that before.
Erotic assistance? I didn't even know that. Is that a thing?
So he was saying we're going to allow some sort of, I can't remember what the phrase he used, and I don't want to embarrass myself by getting it wrong, but whereas before they've kept the interaction relatively clean, and I think he's saying we're now going to allow.
That's crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's partly it's inevitable direction of technology, but
that's mad.
The difference between what we think AI could deliver versus it's shopping and it's porn, that's a little bit underwhelming, to be honest.
Yeah.
One of the things that we touched on in the first podcast as well was, as I mentioned, the chap was the CEO of a cybersecurity organisation. You've worked in organisations where the focus is on AI. Are the universities putting out the right students now for those kind of businesses, for the areas that you've been working in?
No, I don't have a strong...
And if not, what needs to change?
Yeah, I don't have a strong view. I tell you what, I think education needs to wake up to AI in a big way. And so for people going into computer science and other sort of similar sort of technical disciplines, I think AI is a massive part. Now, I don't have a view on whether these courses are adapting to that already. My sense is that they're probably not. It feels to me in the UK we have a very Victorian attitude to education in general. Setting universities aside, schools themselves, how they deal with AI, I think is a huge thorny issue. We've got all this knowledge now at our fingertips, all this kind of curated, and the LLMs can do brilliant things. But how do you develop young minds when all of that is around you at your fingertips? I think is a huge societal challenge. We don't have the answers on this podcast, I doubt, but it's a huge issue.
Because one of the things you mentioned as well is about coding. Get people into coding, you'll have a job for life kind of thing, become a software engineer, which I'm sure is all still grand and things, but some of the models that are out now, and I was in Codebase like 2 weeks ago in Stirling, and there was a guy on his lunch, and it was just like going, and I was like, is that AI? And he's like, yeah. I'm going to check it obviously, but I was like, that's crazy.
It's genuinely really profound, because what do you give to young people in order to, what skills to learn if you can all outsource it to something else? That's something we need to grapple with. Now, it could be that we all become more knowledgeable about how to interact with LLMs, etc., but that can't be the answer in itself. People have to learn social, technical, all sorts of a range of different skills. Can't just let the internet do it all for us.
What's kind of like generations coming through is that when I was younger, you're like out in the Tarsies, up the Bing on your bike, stuff like that, and now kids are like just, not that everyone, but sitting in front of iPads or screens or gaming. And
then it's weird. So I've got a 22-year-old son, and he's girlfriendless. His relationship broke up about a year ago, Now, it doesn't help him that he works away Monday to Friday, nowhere close to home, but he keeps going on about, I'd really like to get a girlfriend. He was out at this lass a couple of months ago, and he'd said to his mum, I really like her. So his mum had told me, and I said, I hear you like that. I said, why didn't you ask her out? I said, are you going out this weekend with your pals? No. I said, why didn't you ask her out? He looked at me and went, what? I said, why didn't you ask her out? And he went, to do what? I said, ask her out for a meal, or should I take her for a meal or something like that? He went, can't I do that? And I said, why? He said, you have to talk to them first. You have to talk to them for a while. I went, but you have spoken to her. She was here at the house. He went, oh, no, you have to, I'll message her and that for a while and build up a relationship that way before I would ask her out. And he thought I was weird. He actually said to me, he went, would you have just asked her out? I went, aye. He went, that's weird. I'm thinking,
Really?
I'm thinking, no, you're weird. But that must be a generational. I'm not saying all youngsters are like that, but
it's one
in
of those
his mind, just contacting and saying, we know who each other are. Would you fancy going out on the weekend? I'll take you out for a meal. He's saying, absolutely not. She'll think I was a weirdo. Okay.
It makes me glad I'm not young anymore.
That would do good. I'm glad to hear it's going that way. What's the craziest? AI is just a hot topic just now. Is there anything crazy you've done with AI? Anything you've built? Anything like something you've found out about using it? Or
There's an AI product called Lovable.io. I can't remember what the website actually is, but I was working with some people in the wealth management sector, and they just had this idea for a product. I said, let me take what you want to do, work with this tool for an afternoon. I didn't know it would only take an afternoon at the time, and I guess I used the afternoon to build a product. And then I probably tweaked it over the weekend before Monday saying, ta-da, here's the thing. And I was genuinely blown away by the capability. Now again, to come back to an earlier answer I gave about, I would never go and say, I've developed a product, let's go ship it or go sell it. But I got it, it had dummy data in it, it had complete workflows, it had a nice looking dashboard, everything just through me prompt engineering. And it also, what was really interesting is going through that process was me using prompts to say, no, don't do it this way, do it this way, as it produced code in front of you. Of course, it never got tired, never got frustrated. It would just endlessly respond to all of my requests. I could ask it really dumb questions. It would give me simple answers back. It would make mistakes. It would say, oh, if this isn't, I've realized the whatever. And it would go and fix the mistakes. And so you were participating and observing, I guess, a dev and dev teams go through all the time. And I found that a really fascinating experience to do. I guess I'm like one of those frustrated authors who thinks he can write, but I don't have the novel. What I really need in my head is think of a great product I could build using some of these tools, because it's absolutely amazing what it's doing, and it's only going to get better.
That's incredible. So it's like a team that would take 6 weeks to build that. You've kind of just went and did it over
Went and did it.
Yeah.
Now, I'm also reading lately that sort of some people are saying that if it doesn't fit with, say if you're a product manager and you go and build something, you say what and show this to the team, then it might not work or integrate with what you've already built. So I'm not saying it's a slam dunk and you don't need devs anymore, but I think particularly for product people who maybe have an idea, they don't want to waste the engineers' time on it, but they want to mock up a prototype and say, look, what do you think of this? Does this work? Or show it to non-technical people and say, is this something that would work for you? I think it's a potential game changer in terms of speeding up that iteration cycle. Showing something real rather than just talking about it on a whiteboard or a Figma demonstration or something.
Oh, totally. Just like you say, it's just your creativity, isn't it? It's what you can think about to ask it. You can get it built. Yeah. That is us on to section 3, which is on purpose, people, and learning. You've said technology can never be truly neutral. What do you mean by that, and how should leaders think about it when designing systems or AI products?
It's an ethical, moral dimension. Quite often, the classic analogy is guns don't kill people, people with guns kill people. And I think that's a kind of specious argument. If you're going to put something into the marketplace that has a capability, you might not have intended it to be used for a certain real, but you can't. I don't think you can divorce yourself entirely from an obligation. So if people are using it in a way that you didn't expect, didn't want it to, you can also take it back to Oppenheimer and splitting the atom, and you didn't want it to be used as a bomb, etc. like that. So I think it's people running away from their obligations when they say it's not our fault that Twitter's become or X has become a kind of a cesspool of social media. That's partly on the people who made it. And likewise with any technology, it's similar. We had with Utopi, completely unintentionally and nothing particularly particularly bad. We we're collecting data around motion and sound in individual spaces. It's just no recording or watching of anything. It's just registering if a sound is made or if something moves across a field of vision of a sensor. But you realize once you put it into the platform, you realize actually that from that data, someone could infer whether there's a person present or what their patterns of movement might be within an individual space. And so you have to be careful about that. To some places, make it not visible to people who might be looking at it, but also make sure and train people who are looking at that data that it has to be used in an ethical manner. And likewise, that the people whose spaces are being monitored in that fashion are aware that data is being collected and the nature of how that data is being collected and used. To pretend otherwise is not a great place to be in. So it affects, it's easy to focus on the gun example as an extreme version, but it affects all sorts of products in all sorts of subtle ways.
You've got responsibility to, like, if you're issuing stuff out, like Elon Musk selling flamethrowers and stuff like that, like, I'll just sell them. But yeah, it's really interesting, and I suppose you need to link closer, like, with government. There's even some of the AI models, like OpenAI and stuff, just releasing new things. AI agents that can go on and post an A/B listing for you. They can go and do all these things, but is there enough communication between the two to kind of prevent?
And the bias within the models again is another sort of area that we need to be conscious of. So clearly, middle-aged white men, as we all are, need to be aware that we are probably overrepresented in the data, and there's all sorts of biases that we have to be careful of, not to just promulgate and amplify in the way that we adopt, particularly AI.
I like the fact that you've grouped us all together there as middle-aged white men, because he'll go away and cry with that all afternoon now. I don't know, some of the same ages.
You were telling me it was going back.
It definitely is. You talk about connecting people, purpose and progress through feedback loops. What does that look like in action? How do you design those loops into a team's rhythm?
I actually find that product and engineering teams are probably the most reflective people I've ever come across in organizations. I've been thinking about it lately about what would happen if you applied it to others, like finance or marketing or so on and so forth. Because actually, my experience within the product and engineering is that we're constantly looking for the optimal way to deliver something. We're constantly have the ceremonies that talk about what went well, the sprint, what didn't go so well. How do we reconfigure the team? There's something big coming down the pipeline. We don't have the resources, so how do we reconfigure a team in order to deliver that? A level of agility and reflection that I don't see in other parts of an organization. And I'm not saying that finance should have to do that. Of course, that might be fatally ridiculous if they were reorganizing themselves all the time. But nonetheless, I think it is quite a reflective group of people. And so the cadences, the ceremonies already exist quite often within, so you don't really need to add anything new. It's taking some of those learnings out and, say, applying it to an exec team, for example. How do they become reflective is difficult. One adjunct to that as well, of course, that is how do you get customer feedback into a sort of product development team. We had multiple different ways of doing that. Was obviously direct customer feedback, but also we had this kind of curious situation where part of the benefit of our product was that you could just set it and let it run. And so you didn't necessarily want users all the time in amongst all the data looking at it all the time, because that would be like, you're wasting your time, go and do your proper job. So we had this kind of usage in itself wasn't always the metric that you wanted to try and get feedback from. You just wanted to say, is it doing the thing it was supposed to be doing? If it is, then great, you can just leave it alone. If you're finding you're having to go in and look at the data all the time, then maybe that's something we need to improve.
Thanks for that.
Do you think empathy and leadership are unappreciated in leadership teams, especially in fast-moving tech teams? And listening, empathy and listening, I mean to say.
Yeah, no, what'd you say? Yeah, no, I think they definitely are. And it's something I struggle with a little bit, because I'm not always the loudest voice in the room. So I am, I think, a listener, quite empathetic, but I don't tub the table and say my way or the highway. I think I try and listen. And so sometimes in those kind of particularly quite male-dominated environments, you find that it is the loudest voices in the room. I come from, when my consulting background, this was exactly the case. I'd be sat as a more junior consultant, sat around a table, listening to a senior person pontificate about this and that, thinking, well, that's bollocks, don't believe any of it. But I don't feel I have the confidence. But in that type of environment, sometimes it's the people respond to certainty and conviction. And that's not always a recipe for getting to the right answer.
I think that's all the way through life.
Uh-huh.
I was talking to one of my son's girlfriends who had just started at Edinburgh University doing law, and I know her dad really well and his background and mum. And I'd said to her, one of the things that you may come across is being in a room with people who seem really cocksure about what they're saying, really confident about themselves, and it is having the ability to say, you articulated that really well, but it is shit. And having that confidence. I said, and you won't get that easily. But once you've done it once, that will give you more of a confidence to say, no, I know I'm right in my thinking here, and confronting people and thinking that isn't right.
Yeah.
It's a big learning to be able to say something that's bullshit. You know, like to actually call them out on it kind of thing. I definitely did that. You should like get on with it. Sit in the background thinking about what they're actually saying. There's group dynamics, isn't it? Like in a meeting, if you don't want to say anything, but if that person's become very authoritarian in their leadership style, when you've watched people, you learn by seeing as well. If you've watched someone get chastised by actually speaking out and saying something, and be like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. You decide which battles, again, back to bring it back to the sort of product experience I've got. We could have made every kind of product discussion a battle, or you say, okay, there are certain things I feel very strongly about that we need to do. There are other things that you're not balancing a set of different evidential positions against one another. You're saying, well, that's your opinion, that's my opinion. Who can say which is exactly the right way to go? So some of those you have to let go. You can't win every battle, but you choose your battles wisely.
I think as well, when you're talking about that, if you're the boss in that situation, it's great to be able to listen and have empathy and say, okay, I take on board what you're saying. I like this part of it. We can maybe look to implement that. I'm not confident on that. This won't work because of this. Ultimately, I make the decision on this. And when you're doing it up the way, it's to say your tuppence worth, if you like, and then your boss will say, okay, I've got your input. Yeah. This is how we're going to do it. I want you to now go and deliver. And it's about then not throwing your toys out the pram and saying, okay, I had my say, I had my input. I understand the direction you want us to go in. So you said the best teams learn faster than they deliver. How do you actually make that real in day-to-day culture?
Again, it's something easy to write down and say than it is to do. And again, it comes back to as long as you've got people who are willing to try and experiment and deliver things and then say, actually, that didn't work, we need to think again. It's an aptitude as opposed to a process. And so you need to make sure that when you're releasing something into the field, either on an experimental basis or in a live environment, you have to be willing to look at the data and say, is this working or isn't it? How do we need to tweak it, but not say, this is my precious thing, I've delivered into the product and it must not be touched. You have to be willing to let things break.
Thanks for that.
How do you balance for pushing for delivery, then also keeping time there for looking at reflection and improvement as well with products?
Again, really difficult to do when you're in a high pressurized delivery environment from a product perspective. I know there are some companies who allocate time, say every Friday afternoon, or maybe flexible, but an afternoon of, say, a dev's time every week to do their own little projects, which I think are great ideas. I've not yet been in an organization where I felt particularly comfortable doing it. When you think the rest of the business is going at 100%, everyone's working really hard, but we're allowing some time for people to just tinker with things now. So I feel that tension because I realized that that time spent is valuable time. But it's just quite a difficult thing to articulate and convey the value of to non-product and engineering people, saying, but my customer success team are working 12 hours a day and they're seeing the devs over there doing something, that just playing at something. I'm not articulating it very well, but I think I see the value of it. There should be time for reflection. You probably just need to be relatively discreet about how it gets.
It's that thing, I think you have described it well. It's that thing about the sort of textbook theory of this is what should happen. We work in an industry where that happens as well. There's a textbook theory of what should happen, but the actual reality of what can happen with the time that you're allowed, because there are ongoing moving parts in your business. Yeah. So I get that 100%.
On to closing and takeaways.
So you've led at every level from corporate innovation to startup growth. What's next for you? What kind of challenges or teams excite you most now?
Yeah, so I think something that's mission driven, I think, is definitely a motivating factor. I don't want to just crank the handle at something that doesn't add value to the people or to the planet or society, if you like. So that would be something that I'd be keen to do. the journeys I've been on to take you from the MVP, the vaporware, through to something that's substantial and adding value. That's such a fun part to do. You're building processes, you're hiring people, you're forming a team. That's a really exciting thing to do. So something, again, of that nature would be great. And working with interesting people. So to bring it back to where we started about how I ended up in a sort of tech career was this being interested in sort of technical concepts and meeting interesting people who know things that I don't. And that's, to me, is the kind of sweet spot. If I'm engaged with people who, it could be a sector, it could be a technical discipline or something, but I don't know enough. I don't know a lot about it, but it's intriguing to me. That's where I get maximum sort of buzz, because I'm learning something new each day of different people, applying it. And hopefully by now, with this level of grey hair, taking what I've learned over the last sort of 25 years or so and applying it to this new thing that I'm going to.
And what advice then would you give to tech and product leaders or the next generation of them? What's one bit of advice you'd pass on?
Be humble and don't assume that you know it all, because even though you might be steeped in tech and product from maybe your graduation days, sometimes that can be a weakness as well as a strength if you just think, I know. So you have to, again, it strikes me that the funnest part of any kind of job is learning off other people. So if you're not prepared to do that, then I don't think you'll enjoy.
Solid advice, totally. Yeah.
I think as well, you talked to your grey hair, which I think looks absolutely fantastic. The younger generations are coming through with new ideas and new ways. The way that they live off mobile phones, for example, was different to when we were their age. So always having new ideas about how the world should look and feel and what they want going forward.
You do become conscious, use the age thing, you do become conscious that you grew up in a different time, that some of the things that younger people will find just completely native to them are different from me. And so again, that can be a source of weakness or strength. It can be, I can remember a time before the internet, a time before mobile, and so on and so forth. Now, it also means you have to step outside your own kind of perspective and think, what does it mean then for a young person? We were designing a resident app, for example, or a consumer app. I felt somewhat ill-equipped to understand, say, what a young student would go through these days and what an app would need to deliver them. Now, luckily, we had younger people in the team, more empathy for that age group. So sometimes in this sort of digital native landscape, you start to think, am I becoming a little bit out of touch? But hopefully the sort of business skills and the sort of the general level of empathy will serve me well.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Andy, this has been brilliant.
Yeah.
Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate you coming on the Tech Phair podcast, and wish you all the very best going forward.
Thanks very much. Great to talk to you.
Thanks.